Today's guest is Kellie Horner. Kellie is head falconer at the Cotswold Falconry Centre here in the UK, and she joins me now. Kellie, welcome to the Practical Animal Channel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem at all, it's my pleasure. First of all, Kellie, what can you tell me about this fantastic animal on your fist?
This is Tyke. Tyke is a little American kestrel, little male American kestrel, and he is coming up for a year old now.
And is he one of the display birds?
He is actually my own personal bird. I fly him with my two children. I've got two young children of 2 and 6. And he's a bird that they have taken to flying as well. So I have a day at the Falconry Centre, I come home, and then I've got my birds to sort out when I get home, and to fly and to feed and to look after as well.
That's great. Kellie, for somebody wanting to get into falconry, would you recommend an American kestrel or something else?
As a first-time bird, I would probably recommend something bigger. The problem with American kestrels is because they're so small, their metabolism is really quick. So they burn up a lot of energy in a very short period of time. Being a small bird, their weight management is a lot more precise. So if I wasn't to give him enough food and it was a really cold night, the chances are he could potentially be quite unwell the next morning. So the best thing would be to go for a bigger bird who's got it's a bit more forgiving in the weight management size. So if I wasn't to give him enough, then I'd have to compensate for it the next morning, but he shouldn't be as unwell as something a little bit smaller. So a lot of people go for things like Harris hawks and red-tailed hawks as one of the first birds to train, but they are quite specialist. So I would always suggest that they would look for a good mentor and go out with somebody that's already got a bird, so that they have got the idea of what's involved, and the handling side of things and the weight management things, which is incredibly important with working and flying birds of prey. And maybe do some voluntary work at a falconry centre that might be near them, so that they do have more of a hands-on experience and a lot more of an understanding of what's involved in it as well.
Thank you. What we do on the Practical Animal Channel when we arrange these interviews is to try through the interviews to provide the subscriber, to provide the viewer with an insight into what it takes to work with animals. The assumption is that people watching the interviews are people who fancy the idea of working with animals. They're curious about what it takes, the skills and qualifications, etc. You are head falconer at the Cotswold Falconry Centre. Please, can you describe your career and how you reached this level of success, please, Kellie?
Yeah, of course. So I did my A-levels at school, and then went on to university and studied animal behaviour and welfare as a degree at university. I worked incredibly hard, centred my studies around birds because I knew right from the beginning that I wanted to work with birds. So did a lot of my dissertation on birds, and at that time I was volunteering at a very small falconry centre, so it gave me the kind of basics in what is involved in working with the birds of prey, which kind of were the foundations that managed to pave the way to where I am now. So that was the kind of initial stages that I had. Once I had finished my degree, I was able to start as a apprentice at another falconry centre, and then I worked there for a number of years. I then moved to a zoo and was working in the zoo sector for 7 years as a bird keeper, and then I progressed to head of birds, head of section. So I wasn't just working with birds of prey then, I was working with parrots and ducks and penguins and flamingos, as well as a small selection of birds of prey that we had. That I had to go and pick up a bird for the zoo at Cotswold Falconry, and I had learnt then that they were looking for somebody. They had a vacant position, and that's when I thought, well, I will apply and see how I get on. And I was very lucky to get an interview, and then from there was able to get the job. So I've been working at Cotswold Falconry now for 5 years, and it's everything that I've always wanted to do. I thoroughly enjoy working with the birds and teaching people about the birds and how they would be living their lives in the wild and how they find food, and basically just raising awareness about some of the problems that other species are having that aren't doing quite so well in the wild.
Kellie, what would you say are the core personal skills and the core personal qualities needed to work with animals, or in particular with birds of prey?
Okay, so with birds of prey, things like manual dexterity, it would be pretty important. You need to learn the falconer's knot, and this falconer's knot is an integral part of working with birds of prey as it is at the moment. So that's pretty important that you can get that right. Also basic IT skills as well. I mean, we use telemetry for the birds to track the birds. Telemetry has progressed in the last few years. We now use a GPS system which is linked to our phone, so you need to be able to use your mobile phone quite well, and you need to be able to use this software quite well too. We also use animal care software for record keeping, so record keeping is pretty important. We weigh the birds daily. The birds' weights then need to be recorded, and as part of our zoo license, we need to make sure that we have accurate records of all of the birds' weights, and other medical issues and other welfare issues is all recorded as well. So being able to use the software for that is pretty important too. Probably one of the main things with working with birds of prey in a falconry centre is public speaking. You've got to be very good at speaking to either a very small selection of people when you're doing experiences. It could be a one-to-one experience, or maybe one person and their family, or maybe small children that don't quite want to hear all of the ins and outs of working with birds of prey, but still need to kind of be engaged in what's going on with the birds. But also the big displays that we do as well. We can have up to 200-300 people at the centre watching a display. So you need to be able to present yourself well, and to be able to keep the engagement with the public, and ad-libbing when you need to as well, because quite often the bird might be sat in a tree not doing anything, or it might have gone out of sight for a little while. So you have to kind of fill the gaps and ad-lib very, very well.
How can a person who perhaps feels slightly less confident than other people when public speaking, but still they desperately want to give displays, how can they improve their self-confidence, if you like?
Probably by trying out on a very small amount of people to begin with. I mean, if you were to volunteer at a falconry centre, they're not going to throw you in at the deep end. They're going to kind of build you up to it. And if you can get out, you know, if you're working in that kind of public sector, and you're just volunteering to begin with, then at least you might be able to just start approaching people and just gradually build it up. I wasn't always very good at talking to loads and loads of people in one go, but I gradually plucked up the courage to begin with to just talk to a couple of visitors that were looking around and just explain to them about the bird that they might be looking at, just to kind of get my confidence, and then just boost your confidence from there to the point then when you are starting to talk to lots of people and not batting an eyelid about it at all. There's also, if people really aren't so keen on talking to the public but want to work with birds of prey, then it might be a better idea to go down the wildlife rehabilitation sector instead. There's a lot of wildlife rescue centres out there that deal with not just birds of prey, but other birds and other animals as well. But that might be a way of getting your hands on with the birds without having to do the whole public speaking side of things. And also there are larger centres. I mean, we're a relatively small centre, so there's only 3 of us that are bird handlers there. But larger centres would have a big bird display team, and then they might need some other members of staff to do more of the sort of behind the scenes cleaning and maybe other welfare, other husbandry management jobs that might need doing, that might not necessarily mean that you'd need to be right in the middle of the public, but you can take more of a backseat approach, but still get the hands-on with the birds that you might desire. So there are kind of ways of going around it, but I would say that public speaking is a really valuable tool if people can do it, and it is just a case of confidence building. So start very small and just work your way up, but try and push yourself and talk about things that you're good at talking about. So certain species that you might have learned stuff about since you were a child is a really good one to start with. I mean, I always loved Peregrine Falcons when I was younger, and so Peregrine Falcon I could talk about for ages, and that might be a better one to talk about than a bird that you're not so familiar with. And then your enthusiasm might come out a little bit more with it as well.
That's a great insight. Thank you, Kellie. How would you describe the bird of prey sector nowadays?
I think everything is moving. There's a lot more modern approaches to falconry now. I've touched on the GPS tracking system, which is a new modern approach to flying the birds. The tracking system is amazing because it can tell you exactly what your bird is doing. So it gives you something to talk about when people can't see the bird. If the bird is, you've lost sight of the bird, it's gone down behind trees, but it is still flying. You can tell people how far away it is, how high it's flying, how fast it's flying, what direction it's flying, whether it is still flying, or not, and not sat in a tree behind waiting for the idiot to run out of things to say, and then kind of turns around and flies back hoping it's going to get an easy meal. So the GPS system is an amazing system to have. It's an all singing, all dancing system, and it does mean that we're able to talk to the public with a lot more information on what that particular bird is doing. But it also enables us to reward the bird according to what it's doing. So I was saying how it could be sat in a tree. You don't want to be rewarding it coming out from a tree. But if it is out of sight, but it's still doing the job that you want it to do, then you can be in a position ready to reward it when it does return. So it also, that also helps with rewarding the bird for the right behaviours at the right time. Generally, with the health and the welfare of birds of prey, people are starting to move towards free lofting their birds, so keeping a bird in an aviary and then having those aviaries with like a little door or a little hatch on, flying the bird straight out of an aviary, allowing it to do what it needs to do as part of the display, and then flying back into an aviary rather than being tethered. Some people in some centres have moved away from tethering entirely, and we as a centre have moved some of our birds into aviaries. We fly some of the birds straight out of aviaries without tethering. We do still have a few birds that are tethered, but we're trying to kind of keep up with the times, and it's important to try and keep up with the methods as much as you possibly can. You don't want to be left behind. You want to make sure that you are providing the best possible husbandry for the birds that you have. So it's also important to learn about the different studies that are going on. Birds are being studied all the time, and disasters are happening all the time with certain species, it's important to keep track of what is happening with birds, so that you can tell the public what is happening, to raise awareness about the problems that birds might be facing. A good example is the vultures from Africa. Their numbers have really rocketed down in the last sort of 30 years or so. They've really taken quite a hammering, and so it's important to know why that is happening, and to try and raise awareness of the problems that they're facing out there in Africa. I was really lucky. The centre sent me out to South Africa a few years ago to witness firsthand what the problems are. And it was a real eye-opener. It was also an amazing opportunity to be able to catch up these vultures. They were young vultures that were still in the nest. They were relatively large, but they hadn't quite fledged the nest yet. So we would have to scale these incredibly thorny acacia trees to get up to the very top to get to the nest. And then we would catch up the chick and put it in like a bucket to then take down safely where it was processed. So it would have a ring put on its leg, a tag put on its wing, and then it would be had blood taken from it to determine whether it was a male or a female. It was assessed with how far along it was in terms of development, and then it was carefully placed back into the bucket, taken back up to the top of the nest, and left there. And then we moved out the way and watched the parents as they returned to look after the chick. And this is really valuable work to be done, because with the tagging, it gave researchers a chance to figure out where these birds had come from. So in certain places in South Africa, they would put out it was called vulture restaurants. So they would put out food for the vultures, and the vultures could come down safely and feed on this carcass. And then there were hides around the carcass that the researchers would be sitting in, and they could look at the tag on the bird's wing, and they would know exactly how old it was, what sex it was, where it was born, like where it come from, and how much traveling it had done. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to take part in part of that research. So then all of this was happening, and then we found that some birds would travel quite a distance. Some birds would go out of the protected areas, and that's when they may fall foul to the poisoning that was going on. Birds over there were being poisoned unintentionally and intentionally. Unintentionally by the people that want to protect their livestock from the big cats. They don't want their big cats being eaten. They don't want the big cats eating the livestock, but they also don't want themselves and their family being eaten by these big cats. So they put out poison baits. Unfortunately, a poison bait looked like a great bit of carrion for a vulture that was circling high up in the sky. And if they were to take that poison bait, then they would unfortunately die. But then also there's the poachers. The poachers would deliberately poison elephant carcasses, because when they have killed an elephant, when they've poached an elephant, they've created a carcass that the vultures are going to want to feed on. So within half an hour of that elephant dying, hundreds of vultures will be circling high in the sky, which then the authorities could use to locate where this elephant has died and potentially try to capture the people that were responsible for killing the elephant in the first place. So poachers have wised up to that now. Once they've killed the elephant and they've taken the tusks, then they will lace its body deliberately with poison to kill off these vultures. So then there aren't so many when they come back in a week or so's time to kill another elephant, or they kill a rhino down the road for the rhino horn. There isn't as many vultures circling high in the sky, alerting the authorities to where these poachers are working. This is something that's happening more and more, and so it's important to know the stories that that when it is happening and how many vultures are affected, and what effect that's going to have on their overall population, so that you have got something to talk about and raise awareness to with the members of your public when you're flying your captive vultures and using them as an ambassador for the wild population that's out there. Breeding is also a very important part of the Falconry Centre, and we try and breed species that aren't doing quite so well in the wild. It's important to concentrate your efforts on birds that aren't doing quite so well. So we are a member of Project Lugger, which is quite an organisation that's quite in its infancy, who's really trying to protect the population of Lugger Falcons. The Lugger Falcons in India have really plummeted in their numbers in the last 30 years or so. And so this Project Lugger is trying to keep their population in captivity, having a nice, healthy captive population, which hopefully, if they breed and breed, maybe their ancestors, maybe, in a few generations' time, those youngsters might be able to be taken back to India to then breed in their home sort of lands. So then hopefully those youngsters will then be released back into their home ground, into the wild. So we're quite pleased to be part of Project Lugger, and in fact we've actually got 2 Lugger Falcon chicks at the moment that are a first for Cotswold Falconry, and are really important to help with the whole Project Lugger. So we're pretty delighted about that at the moment. So it's important to keep an eye on what's going on, both in the wild and throughout other falconry centres, to try and keep up with the times, to try and keep your approach to working with the birds of prey as positive as you can, but also to make sure that you're providing the best possible care for the birds that you have in your care. And if anything advances, to make sure that you are kind of there with the advancements as well.
That was fascinating. A personal hero of mine, Gerald Durrell, used to say, shortly after he opened his zoo on the island of Jersey, he used to say that one of his goals with the zoo, because it was entirely concerned at that time with breeding endangered species in captivity, one of his goals was to eventually shut the zoo down. It's fascinating to hear your involvement with Project Lugger and the Lugger Falcon and the Vultures crisis. I wanted to talk more about the Vulture Conservation Project, but I fear we may be out of time. But how do you see, Kellie, the bird of prey sector developing in the next 20 years? Do you see lots of species of endangered birds of prey coming off the endangered list, or what?
I would like to think so. I think that's what everybody's goal is, to try and make sure that the birds that are having a tough time in the wild would come off of the endangered list. And certainly there has been species, there's been certain species that has had that happen throughout the world. Things like the Mauritius kestrel has really done very well because of falconry centres and zoos getting on board. And I think that's something that everybody that works in a falconry centre would like to see. It's also important to raise that awareness, to make sure that the public know and are kind of with you with what you're trying to do. I think that with falconry centres, it's a shame to think that with some species, a falconry centre is probably going to be the only place that you're going to see them if we don't intervene and if we don't act relatively quickly. But there are some certain species that really are having a tough time, and I don't know if it is too late for some of those species, which does make us quite sad, but you try and do what you can to help them out. I would like to think that falconry centres will continue to work alongside other zoos and other centres, because at the end of the day we are all after the same goal. So we are all trying to help conserve species. So I'd like to think that we would continue to work alongside the zoos and other organisations that do the same sort of thing. I think falconry is such a important sport that the actual process of falconry, I hope, will continue for years to come. I hope it doesn't get lost, and I hope that as long as we are able to provide them with the best possible care, that sport will continue for years and years and years. We personally at the Falconry Centre don't really do much with the whole falconry side of things, the training of a bird of prey to catch and kill prey that would then feed yourself and feed your bird and feed your family. We concentrate more on showing people the species specific behaviors that you would normally see out there in the wild. So we try and show as close to the bird's natural behavior as we possibly can. So we've got vultures and buzzards that we train to fly away, to gain that height, to then soar and glide around so effortlessly, so graciously, and explain to people that that's what they would normally be doing in the wild, because it's a very energy efficient way of finding food. We have falcons that we've trained to fly away, to then gain that height that they need, to then turn that height into speed, to come racing into the lure that's on the flying ground, to show people how they would plan their attack and would maybe use the sunshine to their advantage, or the lie of the land to their advantage, to then come racing in, hugging the ground, or maybe using the sunshine to take their prey by surprise. So we much more concentrate on the natural behavior of the bird, rather than the whole falconry sort of as a pastime, if that makes sense. And I think more and more people are doing that as well, to try and raise awareness and give people more of a perception of what these birds are actually doing in the wild, and making people a little bit more aware of the birds that we have in the UK. There are species that are closer to home that might not be doing quite as well as they would normally. Things like the harriers, and even common kestrels, the English equivalent to the American kestrel here, started to decline in certain places. So to just kind of give people that kind of general idea that some birds might need a bit more help in the UK, and people can help by putting nest boxes up, or sort of surveying what birds they see, and helping with certain surveys that's going on in their area. So it's important to continue with what we're doing. I think everybody wants to try and make sure that there's no birds on the endangered list anymore, no birds of prey. It might not always be possible, but there's certainly things that we can do to help the birds, and to just make sure that everybody is sort of singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like.
Do you take on volunteers, Kellie?
We do. We take on some students that are doing a animal related sort of studies, if you like, and we've got people that are doing placements as well, that will come in big blocks. So we've got someone starting that will be doing about a 9-month work placement with us, but then we also have people that come in once a week, every week, to help with the birds as well. There's always quite a lot of food prep to do, and sitting with the birds to get them used to people, called manning, and to help us with the training of some of the birds as well. Yeah, we do have a sort of volunteer scheme, but we do try to keep it with students that are doing some sort of animal-based study. Yeah.
I've got so many questions that I'd love to ask, but I fear that time is a factor. Kellie, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Oh dear. I think it's important to not give up. I think sometimes you might apply for jobs that you think, oh, I would love to do this, but then also 50 other people have applied for the job, and you might be unlucky at getting a position at a falconry centre or a zoo. But don't give up. The enthusiasm that you need to make sure that you are doing the studying, that's a very important part of working. You need to have the qualification, but you also need lots of experience. So if somebody is really interested in working with birds of prey, maybe they can volunteer at a falconry centre to learn the basics. That's how I started. You learn the basics, like tying the falconer's knot, like holding the bird in the safety position, and you get used to feeding the birds certain foods and what that food will do to their weights and things. And that is in itself really important sort of foundation to have, because falconry centres and zoos, they want you to have the qualifications, but they also want you to have the relevant experience so that you can start straight away and know what you're doing. And so it's very important to single yourself out from everybody else. Make sure that you have got everything that you think an employer is going to want, so that you have the best opportunity to get the job, and definitely don't give up.
Finally, what's your most favourite item in your hawking bag?
Wow, good question. Other than the GPS that I've banged on about quite a bit because I think it's ace, I think a hood is very important. I think it's important to hood the birds, particularly birds that are going to get quite excited about flying. You don't want them using up all of their energy before they've even got out into the flying ground to fly. So hooding a bird is a very important tool in the display side of things. It's also very important in the hunting side of things as well. You might be out in the fields flying your bird that might not be used to dogs or cows, and then you very quickly come across a big field of cows, or somebody's walking their dog down the field where they shouldn't be. You don't want your bird to get upset. That could end up with the bird not being interested in flying at all and being a little bit narked about it, and you then waiting for hours because it's sat in a tree with a bit of a grump on. But the hood, you just pop the hood over the bird's none the wiser. As soon as the cows, you've moved out of the field of the cows, or the person that's walking their dog has moved out of the way, you take the hood off and you're back to flying the bird again without any bother at all. I think a hood is a very important tool for training a bird of prey.
I remember the first time I came across the GPS system when flying falcons, and I was completely blown away by the technology involved and how useful it can be. Kellie Horner, head falconer at Cotswold Falconry Centre, thank you very much for being on The Practical Animal.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for having me.